Shall I start now, sir? Good evening, everyone. So, my name is Dr. Sweta Minhas, and I'll be speaking about organic farming and soil health. So, before beginning the lecture, I'll start with a case study. So, next slide, please. So this case study it highlights an emerging geo-environmental and public health crisis, which is caused by excess selenium in soils of the Shivalik foothill region. Selenium it was released into the soils here due to geogenic causes by the weathering of Shivaliks. The residents here in the Punjab region, which is Hoshiarpur and Nawashahar in Punjab, they experience selenosis symptoms such as hair loss, joint swelling, skeletal deformities, and other chronic health disorders, and long term exposure through food and drinking water, which further increase the risk of irreversible health damage. The selenium toxicity problem in parts of Hoshiarpur and Navashehar is an example of a fragile agro-ecosystem, which is influenced by geogenic trace elements. Excess selenium here disrupted the soil biological activity and nutrient balance, which can be met by following organic farming practices such as addition of organic matter, compost, and green manures, which can help improve the soil structure and microbial diversity. It may immobilize selenium and reduce its bioavailability to the crops. This issue illustrates that sustainable and organic farming are not just environmental ideals, but practical solutions for managing soil based risks, safeguarding food quality, and ensuring long term agricultural viability in the sensitive regions. Now, what is organic and sustainable farming system? So, please, next slide, please, sir. Yes, the organic farming and soil health. It is very closely related and it is not related among itself only. Organic and sustainable farming systems, these are based on the idea that agriculture must work in a harmony with soil, water, plants, animals, and human health. Unlike conventional systems that focus mainly on the yield, sustainable farming it emphasizes on long-term soil fertility, ecological balance, food safety, and human well-being. From the selenium case, which I discussed earlier, we can clearly see what happens when soil constraints are ignored in agricultural planning. Therefore, organic and sustainable farming directly connect the soil health to food quality and water management. By respecting soil constraints and working with the natural processes, sustainable agriculture ensures long term productivity, environmental safety, and food security. So, next slide, please. Now, if we talk about our interest in soil health, is it something new? No. It arose, our respect for land basically it arose and it has been central to human thought since ancient times. And the modern crisis of land degradation, it threatens this long-standing relationship. In the Atharva Vedas, it clearly states that we should live in harmony with nature and humans should not exploit Mother Earth. Vedas has personified Earth as a nurturing mother and recognizes land and soil as life-supporting entities, not just resources to be exhausted. Our Vedas, it clearly reflect an early understanding of sustainability. We should take from nature only what is necessary and ensure its protection for future generations. Even in the Bible, agricultural productivity was directly linked to soil fertility, food security, and social stability, illustrating an early awareness that land degradation could threaten communities. Hippocrates, often called the father of medicine, he also emphasized that health is influenced by environmental factors, including the nature of the local ground. By including soil properties in medical evaluation, he acknowledged the relationship between soil, plant, and human health, a concept that has been rediscovered by modern science through studies on micronutrients, trace elements, and environmental toxicities. In contrast to our ancient wisdom, modern times have witnessed an unprecedented pressure on land resources due to the overgrowing population, intensive agriculture that is being followed to meet the demands and profits. There is an overuse of fertilizers, excessive irrigation, deforestation, and land mismanagement. This all has led to soil degradation, contamination, and loss of soil fertility. All this has threatened the capacity of land to produce food over long periods of time. This highlights an urgent need to return to principles of sustainable land use and modern concepts of soil quality. Health and sustainable agriculture are all an outcome of this pressure. So, next slide, please. Yes. So, soil health issues. How, like, what soil health issues can be overcome by farming organic and sustainable farming practices? Soil health and quality, therefore, we assume a greater significance in present scenario of deteriorating soil conditions. Now, why the soil condition have deteriorated over a period of time? It is because there is an indiscriminate and unbalanced use of fertilizer over a period of time, rampant soil loss due to erosion, and emerging soil concerns such as salinity, soil acidification, etc. With an increase in the pressure on land due to urbanization, industrialization, and to meet the demand of increasing population, the concept of soil quality emerged in the 1990s. We can use the term soil health and quality synonymously as it refers to the capacity of soil to perform specific functions such as supporting crop growth, regulating water, and filtering pollutants. So, next slide, please. When we talk about soil, we are not talking about a physical entity. Soil is a living system, basically. It contains soil microbial fauna, such as bacteria and fungi, earthworms, and other small organisms. Even the roots of the plants interact with the soil life. These biological elements are essential as they help to decompose organic matter and recycle nutrients. They help to improve the structure of soil and its water holding capacity. These biological elements also help with the absorption of nutrients by plants and in disease resistance, thus supporting an overall ecosystem balance of the soil. By using organic inputs, reducing chemical stress on the soil, and avoiding overuse, we allow our soil to function effectively, which ensures healthy crops, clean water, and a stable environment over longer periods of time. So, next slide, please. Okay. Now, coming to the sustainable development goals, how soil health and sustainable development goals are related, and how soil is being ignored under these goals. Although none of the SDGs it clearly mentioned about the soil health, but many of the SDGs they cannot be achieved without healthy and biological active soils. One of which is zero hunger, that is covering the food security. Without soil biodiversity, we cannot achieve crop productivity, which is a threat to food security and sustainable agriculture. Another SDG is clean water, which focuses on water quality. It is again linked to healthy soils. Soils having a rich biological life help to improve water infiltration and storage, filtering pollutants and reducing contamination, which is not there in degraded soils. Degraded soils lose their ability, leading to water scarcity, runoff, and groundwater pollution. Talking about climate change, which is our sustainable development goal number 13, it acts on climate action. Again, soil biodiversity regulates the carbon storage in the soils and greenhouse gas emissions. Microorganisms present in the soil fauna help sequester carbon, making soils one of the largest carbon sinks on the earth. Loss of soil life accelerates climate change. Then there is loss of biodiversity, which concerns life on the land. Again, the foundation of terrestrial ecosystems are soil microbes. These microbes support our plant diversity and help to maintain nutrient cycle. When there is a decline in soil biodiversity, above ground biodiversity also suffers. Threats to human health, focusing on good health and well-being, is also influenced by soil diversity, as it is directly related to nutrient content of the food we take, breakdown of the toxins and pollutants, and disease regulation. If soil health is poor, it can lead to malnutrition, contaminated food, and increased disease risks. But still, soil biodiversity is underestimated somewhere, maybe because it's hidden from view and policies often focus on visible resources like water and crops. Next slide, please, sir. What are the major consequences of the use of conventional technological methods for agriculture? It can be seen on our soil health directly. It has deteriorated over a period of time, the soil health obviously. There is an increased soil erosion, which leads to loss of natural fertility of soil by runoff of the top layer of the soil, poor response to fertilizers, sudden and frequent emergence of new types of diseases and pests. There is a loss of biomass and soil biological diversity and environmental pollution also. So next slide, please. Now this graph here, it shows the declining efficiency or response of crops to NPK fertilizers in India over a period of time from 1960s to 2000s. It indicates that from 1960 to 1969, crops produced about 12 units of grain per unit of NPK applied, which declined to around 10 to 11 units in 1970 to 79, with a further drop in the following years and 2005 onwards. The response reduced to around 8 units or less, which means that we now require more fertilizer to produce the same amount of yield compared to earlier decades. Why do we see this decreasing trend here? This is mainly because of soil degradation. The soil is degraded due to continuous use of chemical fertilizers without organic matter. It has reduced soil organic carbon, which has affected the soil structure, water holding capacity, along with the decline in soil biological activity. Another reason behind this is imbalanced fertilization. Overuse of nitrogen with inadequate phosphorus, potassium, and micronutrients has caused nutrient imbalance and deficiencies of secondary and micronutrients. It has limited crop response to NPK. Also, intensive cropping systems focusing on high yielding varieties and multiple cropping have exhausted soil nutrient reserves. So, next slide, please. Now, what are the adverse effects of synthetic fertilization? Excessive and continuous use of synthetic fertilizers has helped increase crop yields in the short term, but over time, it has caused several serious problems for soil, water, and our ecosystem. Many synthetic fertilizers, especially nitrogen fertilizers like urea and ammonium sulfate, lower the soil pH over the period of time. It leads to soil acidification. Acidic soils has reduced availability of essential nutrients such as phosphorus, calcium, and magnesium, making toxic elements like aluminum and manganese more active, thus harming plant roots, which leads to declining soil fertility and productivity of soils. Saline soils is another concern, which is a result of repeated use of chemical fertilizers. It adds soluble salts to the soil. The soils that are poorly drained or irrigated accumulate salts in the root zone, and high salinity reduces the ability of plants to absorb water, causing stress and yield loss. Over a period of time, soils become less productive and even unfit for cultivation. Then use of synthetic fertilizers can also weaken soil structure when organic matter is not replenished. Soil particles bind tightly and form a hard surface crust. Crusting of soils reduces water infiltration, seedling emergence, and aeration. This restricts the growth of root and reduces crop establishment. Healthy soils highly depend on microorganisms for nutrient cycling. Microbial exhaustion in soils is linked to excessive use of chemical inputs again, which reduces organic carbon supply to microbes. Therefore, beneficial bacteria, fungi, and earthworms decline in number and activity. As a result, soil loses its natural capacity to regenerate fertility. There is also limited nutrition value of soil due to chemical imbalance. Synthetic fertilizers usually supply only NPK, and their continuous use without organic inputs causes deficiencies of secondary and micronutrients. This nutrient imbalance limits plant growth even when NPK is applied in large amounts. Another harmful effect includes leaching, water pollution, and eutrophication. Nutrients from fertilizers are highly water soluble and easily leach into the groundwater. This contaminates drinking water and poses health risks. Runoff into rivers and lakes leads eutrophication, which causes algal blooms, oxygen depletion, and deaths of aquatic life. So next slide, please. What we are seeking from sustainable agriculture. The aim of sustainable agriculture is to meet present food needs without compromising the ability of future generations to produce food. Therefore, key expectations from sustainable agriculture are sustainable production systems which promote farming systems that helps in maintaining long-term productivity, use of natural resources efficiently, and reduce dependence on external chemical inputs. Such systems ensure stable yields over time while protecting soil, water, and ecosystems. Production of healthy food is another goal which we seek from sustainable agriculture. It is one of the primary goals of sustainable agriculture, ensuring nutritious and safe food and food which is free from harmful chemical residues. Healthy soils lead to healthy crops, which in turn support human health and food security. Another thing is protection of soil biodiversity. By following sustainable agricultural system, it recognizes soil as a living system. It protects the soil microorganisms and beneficial fauna, and also encourages natural nutrient cycling and disease suppression. By preventing soil biodiversity, we ensure soil fertility, resilience, and ecosystem stability. Then there is reduced carbon footprint. By minimizing synthetic fertilizers, excessive tillage, and fossil fuel based inputs, sustainable agriculture helps in lowering greenhouse gas emissions and it reduces energy use in farming operations. This makes agriculture more environmental friendly. Mitigation of climate change is another goal. Sustainable practices such as organic matter addition, cover cropping, agroforestry, and conservation tillage increase carbon sequestration in soils, helping to mitigate climate change while improving the soil health. So, next slide, please. Now, organic matter, soil health, and climate change. How are they interlinked with each other? One of the most important pillars of organic farming for improving soil health is the addition of organic matter to the soil. Organic matter in the form of farmyard manure, compost, green manure, crop residues, and bioinputs, when applied in sufficient quantities, it not only improves soil quality but also help to meet the nutritional needs of the crops. Unlike synthetic fertilizers that supply nutrients directly, organic matter works gradually by improving the soil's natural ability to supply the nutrients. When we add organic matter to the soil, it increases soil organic carbon, which improves soil structure, aeration, and its water holding capacity. It supports soil microbes, which decompose organic material and make nutrients available to the plants. Organic matter also enhances plant root growth and improves crop productivity in a sustainable manner. A major outcome of the continuous organic matter addition is carbon sequestration. Plants absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere through photosynthesis, and when plant residues and organic inputs are returned to the soil, this carbon is stored in stable soil organic forms. Retaining carbon in the soil is one of the most effective natural solutions for reducing atmospheric CO2 levels. Healthy carbon-rich soils act as a carbon sink, helping to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, improve soil fertility and resilience, mitigate climate change. Thus, organic farming links soil health, crop nutrition, and climate change mitigation through the simple but powerful practice of adding and retaining organic matter into the soil. So, next slide, please. Now, our soils, it should be a source or a sink to the carbon. Soils across the world have lost large amounts of carbon at an alarming rate, mainly due to human activities. First, development and urbanization has disturbed the natural soil layer. When land is cleared, excavated, or sealed under infrastructure, soil organic carbon is exposed to air and is rapidly oxidized, releasing carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Second, when there is conversion of native grasslands and forests into croplands, it has been a major cause of soil carbon loss. Natural ecosystems, it store large amounts of carbon in plant biomass and deep soil layers. When these lands are cleared, plowed, or burned, much of the stored carbon is released and the soil's ability to store carbon, it declines. Many conventional agricultural practices such as intensive tillage, residue removal, monocropping, and excessive use of synthetic inputs reduce soil organic matter. Tillage increases soil aeration, speeding up decomposition of organic carbon and turning soils from carbon storing systems into carbon emitting systems. This brings us to the global carbon cycle, where soils can act either as a carbon sink or a carbon source. As a sink, Soil will absorb and store carbon from the atmosphere through plant growth and organic matter accumulation. And as a source, degraded or disturbed soils release stored carbon back into the atmosphere as CO2. Therefore, we need to understand these source to sink dynamics. It allows us to make informed choices whether to continue practices that turn soils into carbon sources or to adapt sustainable and organic practices that will restore the soil as long term carbon sinks. Choosing soils as a carbon sink through improved land management, organic matter addition, reduced tillage, and ecosystem restoration is crucial for reversing anthropogenic climate change. Healthy soils not only support food production but also play a central role in stabilizing the Earth's climate system. So, next slide, please. Now, soil health or quality and various properties of the soil. Organic carbon in soil is a key determinant of the multiple soil properties, whether we talk about the physical properties of the soil, biological or chemical properties of the soil. It is directly linked to the physical properties of the soil, such as soil structure, porosity, water retention, and aggregation. On the other hand, when we talk about the biological properties such as microbial activity, diversity, and overall soil life, it is again linked to the organic matter content of the soil. The chemical properties such as nutrient availability, cation exchange capacity, and pH buffering is again linked to the organic matter content of the soil. The level of the organic carbon is often used as a proxy to evaluate the overall health and fertility of the soil because this organic matter it influences all the major aspects of soil functioning. Organic carbon thus acts like the backbone of a healthy soil, connecting its physical, chemical, and biological characteristics. So, next slide, please. How organic carbon and its associated elements determine the productivity of our soil. When we talk about soil biochemical energy flow, organic carbon present in the soil is the primary driver of the soil energy fluxes. Energy released during decomposition is used to transform nutrients such as carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus, sulfur into readily available forms. They synthesize extracellular enzymes and catalyze complex reactions, which supports the formation of stable soil organic matter. In essence, soil organic carbon acts as biochemical fuel, maintaining the soil as a living ecosystem. Soil organic carbon, it also impacts soil structure and energy storage. Decomposition of organic carbon produces humic substances which store chemical energy in a stable form. This biochemical energy reserve maintains microbial activity during periods of low fresh organic inputs. Organic carbon in the soil serves as a reservoir of nutrients. Soil organic carbon is not just a source of energy, it is also a major reservoir for essential nutrients such as nitrogen, phosphorus, sulfur, and micronutrients. It contains nutrients in complex forms. For example, proteins contain nitrogen and sulfur, nucleic acids contain nitrogen and phosphorus, and plant residues they contain potassium, magnesium, and trace elements. As microbes decompose the organic matter, these nutrients are gradually released into the soil, making them readily available for the plants. Soil organic carbon is also highly linked to the soil fertility. It is rich the soil that is rich in organic carbon have higher cation exchange capacity and better nutrient holding capacity. This ensures a steady supply of nutrients over time rather than sudden spikes or losses, which is crucial for sustainable crop production. Organic carbon present in the soil acts as a buffer also by slowing down nutrient release during decomposition, preventing nutrient overload. Organic matter can moderate soil acidity or alkalinity also. This chemical buffering capacity protects soil and plant health both. It provides nutrients during periods of low external inputs, sustaining plant growth and microbial activity. The soil organic carbon, it also acts as a chelating agent when coming to its chemical role. Humic and fulvic acids in soil organic carbon can complex with metal ions such as iron, manganese, copper, and zinc. This increases micronutrient availability and prevents toxic accumulation of metals in the soil. There is also an important role of soil organic carbon in the carbon sequestration process. Soil organic carbon forms stable in and contributes to long-term soil fertility and climate. So can you share the next slide, please? Yes, sir, it's visible now. Yes, sir. Now, how can we increase the soil organic carbon? By enhancing plant residues and root inputs. Crop residue retention: instead of removing crop residues after harvest, they can be left on the field to decompose naturally. This adds carbon to the soil. Then cover crops and green manures like legumes, rye, or clover crops. They add to the biomass both above and below the ground. By selecting crops with extensive root systems or deep rooted species, it also increases the root derived carbon inputs into the soil. Plant residues and roots provide substrates for microbial activity, which converts them into stable organic matter, enriching soil organic carbon. Increasing organic matter inputs, such as exogenous inputs, where we use manure application, animal manure, which is rich in organic carbon and nutrients. Applying it to the soil, it improves SOC levels and soil fertility. Compost can also be used. Well decomposed compost adds stable organic matter that resists rapid decomposition. On form and off form organic amendments can also be used. These materials, such as crop residues, farmyard manure, kitchen waste, or green waste, can be added to increase the carbon inputs of the soil. Organic amendments, they provide additional carbon sources that microbes convert into stable soil organic matter, thus enhancing soil structure and nutrient retention. Reducing decomposition losses. These can also be reduced practices by following practices such as no-till or reduced-till farming. It reduces the breakdown of organic matter by preserving soil structure and microbial habitats. By applying organic mulch, reduces soil temperature fluctuations and moisture loss, slowing down decomposition. Covering bare soil by maintaining vegetative cover prevents rapid oxidation of SOC, which protects it from soil erosion and microbial loss. Then the principal goal of organic production is to create farming systems that are sustainable, environmentally sound, and in harmony with natural ecosystems. Instead of maximizing yields that are short term through the use of external chemical inputs, organic enterprises aims to maintain long term productivity by conserving soil, water, biodiversity, and an ecological balance is also maintained at the same time. Therefore, organic farming is a system of agricultural production which avoids the use of synthetic chemical fertilizers and pesticides. Organic system completely rely on natural nutrient sources such as compost, green manure, crop residues, and biological nitrogen fixation to maintain the soil fertility. The practice also includes the use of it excludes the use of genetically modified species, reflecting concerns about ecological risks, loss of genetic diversity, and long-term sustainability. In animal production systems, organic farming prohibits antibiotics and growth-enhancing steroids, emphasizing preventive healthcare, proper nutrition, animal welfare, and natural disease resistance rather than the chemical intervention. So, next slide, please. Now, when we compare conventional farming system with the organic farming approaches in terms of crop production and animal husbandry, the conventional farming system, it focuses on maximizing yield through external synthetic inputs. Chemical fertilizers are applied directly to promote rapid plant growth. Pest and disease problems are managed mainly by spraying synthetic insecticides, while synthetic herbicides are used to control weeds efficiently. In livestock production also, animals are often given antibiotics, growth hormones, and medications to prevent disease and enhance growth and productivity. This system emphasizes short-term efficiency and high output, but may lead to environmental pollution, resistance development, and reduced soil and ecosystem health. In contrast, to conventional farming, when we talk about organic farming, it emphasizes on ecological processes and natural inputs. Soil fertility is improved by applying natural fertilizers such as manure and compost that nourishes both the soil organisms and plants also. Pest and disease control relies on natural pesticides, biological control using beneficial insects and birds, and cultural practices like traps and mating disruption. Weed management is achieved through crop rotation, tillage, mulching, and hand weeding rather than synthetic herbicides. In animal production, organic systems provide organic feed access to the outdoors and focus on preventive health measures such as rotational grazing, balanced nutrition, and clean housing, minimizing the need for antibiotics. So, next slide, please. This is a diagram which explains the chain of negative effects caused by increased mineralization of soil organic matter, which often occurs under intensive and chemically driven farming systems. When the rate of soil organic matter mineralization increases, organic carbon is broken down rapidly into inorganic forms such as carbon dioxide and mineral nutrients. If this loss is not compensated by inadequate inorganic organic inputs, it leads to a reduction in the soil organic matter pool. The decline in the soil organic matter, it directly affects the soil physical and chemical properties. Soil fertility also decreases because organic matter is a major source of the nutrient. At the same time, the soil structure deteriorates, leading to increased soil compaction, reduced porosity of the soil, and poorer water infiltration and root growth. Rapid mineralization also causes a modification of soil microbial composition and balance. Beneficial microbes decline in number, while opportunistic or pathogenic microorganisms may increase. This microbial imbalance results in a higher incidence of pests and diseases, which affects the crops. Together, reduced soil fertility, increased compaction, and greater pest and disease pressure ultimately lead to a decline in the crop yield. To compensate for these losses, farmers often increase the use of agrochemicals, fertilizers to restore the fertility, and pesticides to control the pests and diseases, creating a vicious cycle of dependency on external inputs and further soil degradation. This highlights how loss of soil organic matter undermines soil health, productivity, and sustainability. It emphasizes the need for practices that conserve and build organic matter in soils. So, next slide, please. Now, here is a model which depicts the effects of organic and mineral nutrition and how fertilizers stimulate or destroy the soil health. The organic fertilizers, when we see, they aim to feed the soil rather than feeding the plant. Organic fertilizers first add organic matter to the soil. This organic matter is then decomposed by the soil microorganisms, which are stimulated and sustained by this carbon rich input. Through microbial activity, the organic matter is gradually converted into soil nutrients, which are then transformed into plant available nutrients. This creates a self reinforcing cycle. Healthy microbes improve nutrient cycling, soil structure, water holding capacity, and root development. As a result, plants receive nutrients steadily over time, while soil fertility and biological activity increase with the time. Well, on the other hand, when we talk about chemical fertilizers, it aims to feed the plant only rather than the soil. Chemical fertilizers supply plant nutrients directly in readily available mineral forms. Plants can absorb these nutrients quickly, leading to immediate growth responses. However, these inputs do not add organic matter to the soil and provide little or no energy for soil microbes. Over a period of time, the microbial activity of the soil may decline, the soil structure can deteriorate, and nutrient use efficiency decreases. This can make the soil increasingly dependent on repeated chemical fertilizer applications. So, next slide, please. Now, this picture here, it illustrates the decomposition of organic residues in soil and the transformation of nutrients driven mainly by soil microorganisms such as bacteria and fungi. When organic residues such as crop residue, plant litter or manure enter into the soil, they are acted upon by decomposers, primarily bacteria and fungi. During decomposition, part of the carbon in the residues is respired as CO2, releasing heat as energy, which is then used by the microbes for their metabolism. Two major processes occur during this process of microbial decomposition. First is mineralization. Through mineralization, complex organic compounds are broken down into simple inorganic nutrient forms such as ammonium, phosphate, and sulfate that can be absorbed by the plants easily. This process is responsible for nutrient release into the soil solution, making nutrients available for the plant uptake. Then assimilation or immobilization. At the same time, microbes assimilate nutrients into their own biomass to build cells and enzymes. During this phase, nutrients are temporarily immobilized and unavailable to plants until microbes die and decompose. Humification is another process. Not all the organic matter is fully mineralized. A portion of it undergoes humification, which forms humus. It is a dark, stable, complex organic material which improves soil structure, water holding capacity, nutrient retention, and long term fertility of the soil. This organic residues can contribute to both. It can ensure short term nutrient supply through mineralization and long term soil health through humus formation. So, next slide, please. Organic farming, when we talk about it as a system, it is a system of agricultural production that relies on natural ecological processes rather than the synthetic external inputs. It depends on biological nutrient cycling, where soil microorganisms decompose organic matter and release nutrients for plant uptake. Organic inputs such as farmyard manure, compost, green manure, crop residues, and biofertilizers to maintain the fertility of the soil are used. Ecological pest and disease management is carried out. It includes crop rotation, biological control, resistant varieties of the plants are used, and cultural practices instead of synthetic pesticides are used. Soil biological activity and biodiversity, when we talk about it, it regulates nutrient availability, soil structure, and plant health. The natural balance within the agroecosystems, integrating crops, livestock, and local resources is followed in the system of sustainable agricultural production. Overall, it is a system that relies on soil health, biodiversity, and natural processes to achieve sustainable productivity, environmental production, and safe food production rather than on chemical fertilizers, pesticides, and other synthetic inputs. So, next slide, please. Now, for the conversion of a conventional field into an organic field, the first step will be to build up the lost fertility of the soil. This can be achieved by a complete ban on the use of synthetic inputs and increased use of organic and biological inputs only. So, next slide, please. Now here in this figure, it illustrates the benefits of increasing soil carbon over a period of time and how it drives improvements in overall soil quality and agricultural productivity. Soil carbon, it is the foundation of soil quality. As soil carbon increases, overall soil quality improves in a gradual cumulative manner. Soil carbon acts as the backbone of the soil organic matter. It influences physical, chemical, and biological soil processes. The black curve here shows that soil carbon builds up first and then stabilizes, forming the basis for other soil functions. There is improved aggregation and infiltration also. With higher soil carbon, soil particles bind together to form stable aggregates. This improves the soil structure, reduces crusting and erosion, and enhances water infiltration. Better aggregation allows rainwater to enter the soil rather than running off, reducing erosion and flooding risks. There is also an enhanced water and nutrient holding capacity of the soil. Soil organic carbon, it increases the soil's ability to retain water and nutrients. This improves drought resistance, reduces nutrient leaching, and ensures a steady nutrient supply to the plants. There is improved air and water quality and soil biodiversity with the application of soil organic carbon. As the carbon accumulates, soil biological diversity increases. A diverse soil food web improves nutrient cycling and suppresses soil-borne diseases. At the same time, better soil structure and nutrient retention improve water quality by reducing nutrient runoff and leaching, and enhance air quality by reducing dust and greenhouse gas emissions. There is also increased productivity with the combined effects of better structure, higher water and nutrient availability, and biological activity. It leads to higher and more stable crop productivity. It directly responds more slowly than the soil carbon, but once improved, it remains stable over a period of time. So next slide, please. Soil health, it can be improved or restored by adopting integrated biological and conservation based management practices. The main options here include green manures, animal manures, compost, vermicompost, crop residues, and the use of biofertilizers. To build and conserve soil organic carbon, addition of farmyard manure, compost, vermicompost, green manure, retention and incorporation of crop residues is considered. The use of biochar can also be applied where appropriate. Measures are adopted. These practices not only improve soil structure, but nutrient cycling and microbial activity is also improved. Balanced use of organic manures, biofertilizers, and inorganic fertilizers should be there. Biological control agents for management of pests and diseases, cultural and mechanical weed control. There is reduced dependence on chemical pesticides, and it protects the beneficial soil organisms and maintains ecological balance also. To improve the soil biological activity, we can use biofertilizers such as Rhizobium, Azotobacter, PSB, Mycorrhiza, etc. We should avoid excessive pesticide and fertilizer use. Healthy microbial populations drive nutrient cycling and disease suppression also. So there should be minimal use of pesticides and fertilizers, and we should focus more on the use of biofertilizers. Transition to organic or natural farming system, it requires basically gradual reduction of synthetic inputs, greater reliance on ecological processes, which strengthens the long-term soil resilience and sustainability. So next slide, please. When we talk about green manuring, so green manuring is basically the practice of growing a fast growing crop and incorporating it into the soil while it is still green, with the purpose of improving soil fertility, structure, and biological activity. The green crop is plowed into the soil before flowering, where it decomposes and enriches the soil with organic matter and nutrients. The common green manure crops that are used it includes leguminous crops such as sesbania, sun hemp, cowpea, green gram, berseem. And among the non-leguminous crops, it includes mustard, sorghum, maize, etc. Legume cover cropping in grape, mango, guava, and other fruit crops is becoming a common practice in the management of orchards. So next slide, please. When we talk about green manuring in paddy fields, green manuring with dhencha or sesbania is a widely recommended practice in lowland rice because it fits well with the puddle conditions and supplies a large amount of organic matter and nitrogen to the soil. Dhencha, how is it used? It is sown basically 40 to 45 days before transplanting of paddy. This period allows the crop to produce maximum green biomass before incorporation. The seed rate should be 45 to 55 kg per hectare, which ensures quick establishment and dense biomass. We can also treat the seeds. Seeds are pre-treated usually with rhizobium culture at the rate of 5 packets per hectare, which enhances biological nitrogen fixation, increases nitrogen accumulation in plant tissues, and improves the efficiency of green manuring. When the dhencha crop reaches about 40 to 45 days of age, it is incorporated 1 to 2 days before the transplanting the right seedling. Incorporation is done in 2 to 4 inches of standing water using a rotavator. Benefits of incorporating this green manure in paddy fields, it includes that it adds a large amount of organic matter and improves the soil structure. It also supplies 40 to 60 kg nitrogen per hectare through biological nitrogen fixation. It enhances soil microbial activity and nutrient availability. It improves puddling efficiency and reduces percolation losses, reduces the requirement of chemical nitrogen fertilizers, and leads to better root growth, high nutrient uptake, and increased rice yield also. So next slide, please. Now here is a comparison of dry matter and nitrogen accumulation of different green manure crops that we use as a method of green manuring. Dry matter accumulation, when green manure crops these are fast growing and produce sustainable biomass within a short period of time, usually within 40 to 60 days. On an average, the fresh biomass that we get from these green manure crops is 15 to 25 tons per hectare. And dry matter, when we talk about it, is around 4 to 6 tons per hectare. High dry matter production contributes significantly to soil or organic carbon buildup. It improves the soil aggregation and structure. Enhanced microbial activity can be seen during decomposition. Leguminous green manures generally produce higher quality biomass with a narrow carbon to nitrogen ratio, thus enabling faster decomposition and nutrient release. Now, when we talk about nutrient accumulation, green manure crops absorb nutrients from the soil and atmosphere and store them in the plants. Nitrogen, leguminous green manure such as dhancha, sunhemp, cowpea, they fix atmospheric nitrogen through rhizobium symbiosis. Nitrogen accumulation is around 40 to 80 kg nitrogen per hectare. A major portion becomes available to the succeeding crop after mineralization. The release of nutrients after incorporation is there under warm, moist conditions such as puddled paddy fields. 50 to 60% of the nitrogen may be released within the first 2 to 3 weeks. Nutrient release synchronizes well with the nutrient demand of the following crop, especially when it comes to rice. So next slide, please. Now in this slide here, we are comparing the nutrient content of different green manure crops that are commonly used, such as sunhemp, dhancha, and sesbania. As we can see here, the highest nitrogen content can be found in dhancha, with phosphorus content being highest in again in dhancha only, and the potassium content, it can be seen that the highest potassium content can be found in sesbania. So next slide, please. Now, the practice of crop rotation, which is also considered a useful aspect in organic farming. Crop rotation is used for improving the soil health. It is the planned sequence of growing different crops on the same field over time. Properly designed rotations improve soil fertility, soil structure, nutrient balance, and sustainability, especially when leguminous and non-leguminous crops are alternated. Rotation of non-leguminous and leguminous crops, for example, green gram, wheat or maize, they can be rotated. Leguminous crops such as green gram, it fixes atmospheric nitrogen through rhizobium bacteria and enrich the soil with the nitrogen. When followed by non-leguminous crops or cereal crops such as wheat or maize, the residual nitrogen left in the soil is effectively utilized. This reduces the fertilizer requirement of the succeeding crop and improves an overall productivity of the crop. Now we can also use restorative crops followed by the exhaustive crops. For example, sesame, followed by cowpea or green gram or black gram or groundnut. Restorative crops, mostly legumes, it improves soil fertility by adding organic matter and nitrogen. Exhaustive crops remove large quantities of nutrients from the soil. Following an exhaustive crop with the restorative legume, it helps replenish nutrients, maintain soil organic carbon, and prevent fertility decline of the soil. Green manure crops followed by the grain crops. This is another crop rotation system which is being followed, such as dhancha followed by rice, green gram or cowpea followed by wheat or maize. Green manure crops like dhancha, it produce large biomass and add organic matter and nitrogen when incorporated into the soil. Grain crops benefit from the nutrients released during decomposition, which leads to a better growth and yield. In dry systems, dhancha decomposition under flooded conditions ensures rapid nitrogen release synchronized with the crop demand. Overall benefits of such crop rotation, when we talk, it improves the soil fertility and nitrogen balance also. It provides a better soil structure and microbial activity. It reduces the dependence on chemical fertilizers. It carries a efficient nutrient recycling in the soil, and a sustainable and stable crop yields can be achieved by following the practice of crop rotation. So next slide, please. Then the use of manures, different types of manures are there. When we talk about bulky manures, these are the organic manures which are applied in large quantities, mainly to improve soil physical condition, organic matter content, and biological activity, in addition to supplying plant nutrients. Although their nutrient concentration is relatively low compared to chemical fertilizers, their long-term benefits to soil health are significant. Farmyard manure, for example, the nutrient content of farmyard manure, we can see that there is 0.5% of nitrogen, 0.2% phosphorus, and 0.5% potassium content is there. It consists of cattle dung, urine, bedding material, and leftover fodder. It is the most commonly used bulky manure that is used as an organic input in the fields. The benefits that it offers, it improves soil structure, aggregation, and porosity. It also enhances the water holding capacity of the soil. It stimulates soil microbial activity, supplies nutrients slowly and steadily. It reduces nutrient losses by improving nutrient retention of the soil. Then another manure that we use is sheep and goat manure. The nutrient content, again, we can see is 3% nitrogen, 1% phosphorus, and 2% potassium. Sheep and goat manure is richer in nutrients than FIM due to concentrated droppings and lower moisture content. It provides a quick nutrient boost along with the organic matter. It is suitable for dry land and rain-fed agriculture. It improves soil fertility and crop growth. It enhances microbial and enzymatic activity in the soil. On the other hand, when we talk about poultry manure, the nutrient content is nitrogen is around 3.03%. Phosphorus is about 2.6% and 1.4% is the potassium content. Poultry manure is one of the richest organic manure in terms of nutrient content. It supplies nutrients rapidly due to its low carbon nitrogen ratio. It is highly effective for nitrogen and phosphorus demanding crops. It improves soil organic matter and fertility. It should be well decomposed or composted to avoid crop injury. So next slide, please. Now, the other type of manures that we use are concentrated manures in the form of oil cakes. Concentrated manures are organic manures with high nutrient content and are applied in smaller quantities when we compare it to the bulky manures. A major group of concentrated manures is oil cakes, which are obtained after the extraction of oil from oilseed crops. The remaining solid residue is dried and used as a manure. Oil cakes as manure, when we talk about oil cakes that are rich in nitrogen, phosphorus, and other nutrients, it makes them highly effective for improving soil fertility and crop productivity. They decompose relatively faster and release nutrients in readily available forms. Types of oil cakes that can be used, it includes edible and non-edible oil cakes. When we talk about edible oil cakes, these are the oil cakes that are safe for feeding livestock, but they can also be used as manure. For example, groundnut cake, coconut cake, and sesame cake. Characteristics and benefits of these oil cakes includes they are rich in nitrogen and organic matter. It improves soil fertility and microbial activity of the soil. It releases nutrients gradually, reducing the leaching losses of the soil. It is often used where availability exceeds livestock demand. Now, another type of oil cakes that can be used are non-edible ones. These oil cakes are not suitable for animal feeding due to the presence of toxic or bitter compounds, hence are mainly used as manure in the crops. The examples include castor cake, neem cake, and mahua cake. Advantages of these concentrated manures are that it supplies nutrients in higher concentration than the bulky manures. It improves soil fertility and microbial activity. It releases nutrients steadily and improves nutrient use efficiency. It is suitable for high value crops and intensive cropping system also. So next slide, please. Now, if we have to prepare compost, previous one. Sir, इससे पहले हाँ, yes sir. Now, how to make compost? Farm compost is made by placing farm waste in trenches of suitable size, 4.5 to 5 meter long, 1.5 to 2 meter wide, and 1 to 2 meter deep. Farm waste is placed in the trenches layer by layer. Each layer is well moistened by sprinkling cow dung slurry or water. Trenches are then filled up to a height of 0.5 meter above the ground, and the compost is ready for application within 5 to 6 months. So next slide, please. There is another thing which is called fortification or enrichment of the compost. Farm compost generally contains low phosphorus, usually in the range of 0.4 to 0.8%, which makes it nutritionally imbalanced when used as a sole manure. To improve its quality and effectiveness, phosphorus enrichment of compost is recommended. Adding phosphorus corrects the naturally low phosphorus content of farm compost, which makes it a more complete organic manure for crop nutrition. It also enhances microbial activity. Phosphorus, which is essential for microbial growth and energy transfer, its addition to the compost, it stimulates the microbial multiplication, leading to faster and more efficient decomposition of organic residues. It also reduces nitrogen losses. During composting, nitrogen can be lost through ammonia volatilization. Phosphorus addition promotes microbial immobilization of nitrogen, thereby reducing nitrogen losses and improving nitrogen retention in the compost. Materials that can be used for phosphorus enrichment, it includes superphosphate or bone meal. It can be applied at the rate of 1 kg per layer of animal dung. It supplies readily available phosphorus and calcium. Superphosphate also adds sulfur, further improving compost quality. Low-grade phosphate rock can also be used. It can be used as a cheaper alternative to the superphosphate. Organic acids produced during composting, it helps in solubilizing phosphorus from phosphate rock and increase its availability. Animal bone or bone meal can also be used. It serves as a slow-release source of phosphorus and calcium. It improves long-term nutrient availability. The addition of potassium sources, it includes wood ash or ash paste that can be added to the compost to increase the potassium content. Potassium improves the compost value and supports plant growth, stress tolerance, and water regulation. Overall benefits of enrichment of compost, it includes, it produces a nutrient balanced organic manure, which is rich in nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. It improves compost quality and decomposition rate. It enhances nutrient use efficiency in crops. It reduces dependence on chemical fertilizers and supports sustainable soil fertility management. So next slide, please. The quality of compost, it can be further improved by adding phosphorus solubilizing cultures or nitrogen fixing cultures. So nitrogen fixers such as Azotobacter, Azospirillum, different species of Azospirillum, these bacteria can take atmospheric nitrogen and convert it into forms which are usable by the plants like ammonia, thus increasing the nitrogen content of the compost. Phosphate solubilizers or P-solubilizers, it includes Bacillus species and species of Pseudomonas. These bacteria convert insoluble phosphorus compounds in the compost into soluble forms, making phosphorus more available to the plants. How they can be applied? These microbes are applied as a culture broth or water suspension. They are sprinkled when the compost is turned after 1 month. Turning helps mix the microbes evenly and ensures better contact with the compost material. What are the benefits of this inoculation? It increases the nitrogen content. The nitrogen content in straw compost can go by up to 2%, making the compost more nutrient rich. It reduces composting time. The added microbes accelerate the decomposition process, which makes compost ready faster. Enhanced nutrient availability is there. Phosphate solubilizers improve the availability of phosphorus, further improving the fertilizer quality of the compost. By adding nitrogen fixing and phosphate solubilizing bacteria after 1 month of composting, you make the compost richer in nutrients and ready faster, which improves its efficiency as a biofertilizer. So next slide, please. Now, what are the materials that are suitable for the preparation of vermicompost? We can use crop residues such as straw, stalks, husks, leaves left after harvest, which are rich in cellulose and lignin. They provide bulk and nutrients for the earthworms. Then weed biomass can also be used. Non-toxic weeds can be used after chopping for the preparation of vermicompost. It helps to increase organic matter and nutrient content of the compost. Then vegetable waste can be used. The peels of vegetables, trimmings, spoiled vegetables from the kitchens or markets, easily decomposable, are good for earthworm growth. But here we should remember that citrus fruits, they should not be used in the vermicompost preparation as they are harmful for the growth of earthworms. Now, leaf litter can also be used. Fallen leaves from trees and shrubs can be used. They are a good source of carbon. They add structure to the compost. Food refuse, leftover food, it provides nitrogen-rich material for the vermicompost. Waste from agro industries, for example, sugarcane waste, pulp, brewery waste, fruit processing residues. These are usually rich in nutrients and biodegradable. it supports earthworm activity also. Biodegradable portion of urban and rural waste can also be used for the preparation of vermicompost. Kitchen scraps, garden waste, organic portions of municipal solid waste, it can be converted to valuable vermicompost, reducing waste disposable problems also. While using the material for vermicomposting, it should be kept in mind that we should avoid toxic, salty, or chemically treated waste like pesticide laden plant material, plastics, or metals. Chop bulky material into smaller ones to increase the surface area for faster decomposition. Then we should also take care of the moisture content while vermicomposting. The moisture should be maintained between 60 to 70% and shade for the healthy earthworm activity in the vermicompost. So next slide, please. When talking about the different phases of vermicomposting, there are different phases. First, we have to collect all the raw material for the preparation of vermicompost. Then there comes a phase which is called pre-composting or pre-treatment phase. What happens in this phase is the raw organic waste is partially decomposed or pre-composted for 7 to 15 days before adding the earthworms. This reduces the toxicity and stabilizes the temperature also, making it a safer environment for the earthworms to grow. Earthworms cannot survive in fresh and high acidity environment or very hot decomposing material. Therefore, this is a very crucial phase while we are following the process of vermicomposting. Then earthworm introduction or active phase. During this phase, the earthworms are added to the pre-composted material. They ingest the organic matter, digest it, and excrete it as gas. The biological activity is extremely high. Microorganisms in the compost and in the earthworm gut, they break down complex organics such as cellulose, hemicellulose into simpler compounds. Earthworms also mix and aerate the material naturally during this particular phase, which is active phase. Then stabilization or maturation phase is there. When earthworms continue feeding and reduce the volume of the material, the temperature stabilizes around 25 to 30 degrees. Microbial activity continues for the decomposing organics and stabilizing nutrients. Material becomes dark brown, crumbly, and earthy smelling. pH becomes near neutral, which is 6.5 to 7. Now, after the maturation phase comes the harvesting phase. Fully matured vermicompost is separated from the earthworms, usually after 2 to 3 months, depending on the type of waste that we are using for the preparation of vermicompost. Earthworms are often collected and reintroduced into a new batch of vermicompost unit. The key points that we have to take care here, the first is the moisture. It should be ideally 60 to 70% for the earthworms. Proper aeration should be there. Turning is minimal. Earthworms naturally aerate the material. Then the temperature, earthworms work best in 20 to 30 degrees C. So extreme heat should be avoided during the process of vermicomposting. So next slide, please. So now in this slide, we are discussing about the nutrient content of the vermicompost, like how much organic carbon is there. Organic carbon, it is usually 9.5 to 17.98%. Nitrogen is around 0.5 to 1.5%. Phosphorus is from 0.1 to 0.3%. Potassium 0.15 to 0.56%. Sodium around 0.3%. Calcium and magnesium is also there, from 22.67 to 47.6 milliequivalents per 100 gram. Copper is there 2 to 9.5 mg per kg. Iron, zinc, sulfur is also present in a suitably formed vermicompost. So next slide, please. Now the incorporation of green and brown waste for composting. While mixing of green and brown waste, a ratio of carbon from brown waste and nitrogen from the green waste, it should be maintained. Be careful about the ratio of carbon and nitrogen that we are using for the making of compost. If CN ratio is wide, composting will not take place. Narrow CN ratio, usually 30:1, is ideal for the composting. To get a narrow CN ratio, carbon and nitrogen rich material should be mixed together. Green colored waste material like Glyceridia leaves, Parthenium leaves, freshly harvested weeds, Sesbania leaves, which are rich in nitrogen, whereas brown colored waste material like straw, coir dust, dried leaves, and dried grasses, which are rich in carbon, can be used for making this mixture. While making heap formation, alternative layers of carbon-rich material, animal dung and nitrogen-rich material are to be heaped to get a quicker result in composting. So next slide, please. Now, another important thing that we used as an organic input while farming, while following the sustainable agriculture practices are biofertilizers. The biofertilizers are preparations which contain living microorganisms that enhance nutrient availability in the soil. It helps plants to grow naturally. Some biofertilizers are classified as low cost, which makes them accessible to resource limited farmers. These are cheap. These low-cost biofertilizers are affordable for farmers with limited financial resources. They use naturally occurring microbes like rhizobium, azotobacter, azospirillum, PSB, which can be produced without expensive inputs. Low capital intensive, these low cost biofertilizers again do not need much capital. The production does not require expensive machinery or any kind of infrastructure that is expensive. Farmers or small entrepreneurs can produce these biofertilizers locally, reducing dependency on the commercial products. Non-bulk biofertilizers, they are concentrated microbial preparations, so only a small amount is needed per hectare of the crop. This reduces storage and transportation costs compared to the chemical fertilizers. There are eco-friendly biofertilizers also. Unlike chemical fertilizers, they do not harm the soil, water, or beneficial organisms. They help in maintaining the soil fertility naturally by fixing nitrogen, solubilizing phosphorus, or decomposing organic matter. These are also suitable for marginal farmers because of the low cost and minimal capital requirements. Small scale and marginal farmers can adopt biofertilizers easily. They improve crop productivity and soil health without putting a financial strain on the farmers. Some of the examples of low-cost biofertilizers, which includes nitrogen-fixing bacteria such as rhizobium, azotobacter, and azospirillum. PSB, when we talk about different species of bacillus and pseudomonas. Potassium solubilizers include Fraturia species. Then organic matter decomposers such as Trichoderma aspergillus species can be used. Low-cost biofertilizers are affordable. These are eco-friendly. These are easy to produce and highly suitable for small farmers, which makes them a sustainable alternative to chemical fertilizers while improving the fertility of the soil. So next slide. There are different categories of biofertilizers that can be used. Nitrogen fixing microorganisms, which are also known as nitrogen fixers. These microbes convert atmospheric nitrogen into form which is usable by plants, such as ammonia, which enriches the soil nitrogen naturally. Examples include rhizobium, which forms symbiotic nodules in legumes. Azotobacter, it is a free-living bacteria and fix nitrogen non-leguminous crops. Azospirillum, it is associated with roots of cereals like wheat, rice, and maize to enhance nitrogen uptake. It improves the soil fertility, reduces the need for chemical nitrogen fertilizers, and promotes the plant growth. Then PSB, phosphate solubilizers. These microbes convert insoluble phosphates in soil into soluble forms that plants can easily absorb. It includes various bacteria and fungal species, Fusarium, Aspergillus, Penicillium, then Bacillus and Achromobacter are there. It enhances phosphorus availability. It is crucial for the root development, flowering, and seed formation. Then mycorrhizal fungi is there. Mycorrhiza, it forms symbiotic association with plant roots, increases nutrient and water uptake by the plants. Different types of mycorrhiza can be used. It can be ectomycorrhiza, which includes rhizo species like Amanita and your rhizopogon is there. Then endomycorrhiza, such as WAM, it penetrates root cells to improve nutrient absorption, especially phosphorus. Examples include your Glomus and Gigaspora. The function of these categories is mainly to improve the plant nutrient and water uptake. It enhances resistance to soil-borne pathogens, important in forestry, horticulture, and degraded soils. So next slide, please. Now, when we talk about organic fertility, it is not a matter of input substitution only. There is an important difference between conventional and organic fertility management. In conventional systems, fertilizer recommendations are based on soil tests and crop residue response experiments. Soil tests, it estimate plant available nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus. These estimates are combined with the empirical studies to determine how much fertilizer to apply to reach the specific yield targets. It is essentially a predictable input-output system For example, we had X kg of nitrogen and expect Y increase in the yield. By organic systems, when we talk about it, rely on organic amendments such as the use of compost, manure, green manure, cover crops rather than synthetic fertilizers. Organic amendments release nutrients slowly and variably, depending upon the microbial activity, temperature, moisture, and carbon to nitrogen ratio of the soil. Soil tests for plant available nitrogen or phosphorus may show deficiency, but yields often do not correlate with these test results. So next slide, please. To achieve sustainable crop and livestock production, the primary requirement is the maintenance of soil fertility and soil health, basically. So sustainable crop and livestock production, it depends on fertile, healthy soils. Fertile soils provide nutrients, water holding capacity, and support for crops and pasture for livestock. Healthy soils also maintain biological diversity, such as microbes, earthworms, which are essential for the nutrient cycling in the soil. Role of organic practices is also there. Organic farming practices such as composting, green manuring, crop rotation, which we discussed earlier, have direct effects. It increases organic matter, it improves the soil structure, it supply nutrients slowly. And indirect effects also, it enhances the microbial activity, improves water retention and aeration of the soil. It reduces soil erosion and degradation of the soil also is reduced to some extent. Soil health and climate change mitigation, when we talk about soil carbon, is the link between soil health and climate change mitigation. Organic practices increase soil organic carbon, which improves soil fertility and structure. It sequesters atmospheric carbon dioxide, reducing greenhouse gases. Thus, healthy soils not only feed crops but also combat climate change. Organic farming is a holistic system. It is a system approach that maintains or improves soil health over time. Healthy soils produce nutritious crops and fodder for livestock, supporting human and animal health. In a sense, good soil gives healthy plants, and healthy plants gives healthy animals or healthy people. So next slide, please. Now, last, when we talk about organic farming and climate change, the results may not always be positive. While organic farming improves the soil health and sequester carbon, it may sometimes increase greenhouse gases, depending on the system and the crop. This shows that organic, like there is a relation between the type of organic farming practices and the crop that we are using and what kind of impact it has on the climate. Higher emissions from organic paddy cultivation could be expected. Paddy fields emit methane, which is a potent greenhouse gas. Organic rice systems often rely on organic manures, which can increase microbial activity, and consequently methane emissions under flooded conditions can also be increased. Therefore, despite avoiding synthetic fertilizers, organic paddy cultivation may emit more greenhouse gases than conventional methods. Then, when we talk about organic meat production, raising livestock organically does not automatically reduce emissions. Feed conversion efficiency may be lower in organic systems. Land requirement may be higher, leading to more enteric methane and manure emissions per kg of meat. Studies indicate that GHG contributions from organic meat are similar to conventional meat production. To conclude, we can say that organic farming can support soil health and carbon sequestration, but its climate benefits are context dependent. Crop type, management practices, and livestock efficiency are critical factors that determine the net climate impact of organic farming on the climate change. Thank you.
Thank you so much, madam.
Thank you.
Anyone who want any question? Anyone is there? If you have any query, you can ask to Sweta madam.